The following program is presented by the Metropolitan Library Service Agency.
Hello, welcome to All About Kids, a program focusing on the interests of children and young people and some of the issues affecting them. Our guest today, Steve Bennett, is the co-author of Kick the TV Habit, a book published in the fall of 1994 by Penguin. He'll be talking with Fran Hesch, co-chair of the National Parenting Association of Minnesota and a member of the Hopkins City Council.
Steve, I was asked to interview you not as a professional interviewer, but as a parent and as an advocate for children. I've been involved in an organization that's being created for parents by parents to create a family-friendly America. And when I was made aware of this book, I realized that it fits right into some of the goals of that organization, one of which is turning off the media violence and making people aware of their role, making parents aware of their role in monitoring their children's television watching. So one of the things that I've been finding is that one of the most difficult things to do is to change a person's mind and actually to get them to listen. In reading your book, one of the main things that stood out was the compelling argument you make that it's important to be aware of what your children are watching and the enormously negative messages sometimes they're getting. You talk about the mountain of evidence strongly suggesting that this kind of viewing represents a serious hazard to our nation's youth. Could you expound on that?
Well, when you put it all together, it is pretty staggering. You could take a piece of it and you could talk about, well, media and violence or television and violence, and that kind of goes away. And then there will be something about television and exposure to junk food commercials, and that kind of goes away. Television and consumerism, talking about the enormous sales of action and war toys in connection with cartoons. That kind of goes away. When you put it all together, it is quite remarkable. And we ask parents to think about 6 or 7 areas as we define in the book, and to look at television with respect to those areas as if they were a child, because watching television as an adult is very different than watching it as a child, of course. And some of these areas are violence. Okay, now if you define violence in a broad way in terms of who is allowed to do what to whom, it takes on some very interesting meanings, and the resolution of violence, conflict resolution, comes into focus. So look at, say, a cartoon, an action figure cartoon, through the eyes of a young child. And on the one hand, it might seem like, well, here's these dopey comic book-like characters who are kind of, beating each other up and the world is saved at the end. Go a little deeper than that and look at, what is my child getting out of this, okay? When that superhero's fist connects with the evildoer, is there a real sense of empowerment, of feeling strong? Is there a sense, well, maybe I'm not the biggest kid in my class, but boy, I sure feel good and strong when I can save the earth through that fist? Look at that. I mean, your child might be reacting in a very strong way. There might be a real emotional payoff there, okay? Look at commercials in terms of what your child sees. It's not just, oh, here's a commercial for a candy bar. We can kind of tune it out. It's, wow, there's a kid on the playground, and she's got friends, and she's happy, and she's got the candy bar. And it's, hey, I can be happy. I can have friends. I just need the candy bar. Or that pair of shoes. It's, wow, those pair of shoes make me happy and popular. And it's the sense at a very early age of, to be happy, you look outside yourself. You look for external things. You don't think about your own achievement and the love from your family. It's a focus on external. It's very scary.
Would you explain a little bit about that manipulation that is going on by the people marketing to our children? I think that was a fascinating point I read, and it takes you aback when you become aware of it, that in the book you talk about children being responsible for a lot of purchases, actually, that they get their parents to make, but they've been realized by the marketers that they are a huge consumer market, and these programs are really marketing for profit.
Right. The line between product, commercial, and cartoon is blurred. There are no more lines. I mean, something like the Power Rangers was very well conceived from the start that it was a marketing enterprise, and I find it to be exploitation of the worst order. And it's no wonder that kids drive their parents nuts. I want that, I need that. It becomes such an important part of their culture, and that's why I think it's really important to talk about what it is that you find bothersome about these programs or troubling, the way that problems are solved. I mean, we're kind of getting a little far afield here, but when the Turtles came out, I heard about a very clever thing that one parent did. And he said, all right, you can watch with one caveat. You have to invent a Gandhi turtle who travels around with the pack, and at the end of the show, you report to me on how that turtle solved the problem without using his fists, a gun, or anything else. And it got the kids thinking, okay? So I just threw that in because it is possible to counteract that to some extent. But in terms of some of the other areas, we talked about violence and conflict resolution, a little bit about commercialism. Look at who works and who doesn't work. It's fascinating on television. And you look at the sitcoms, people don't work and still have money. They have time. Who are these people? They aren't me, they aren't you. What message are we saying to our kids? I mean, we're trying to raise kids with the idea that they will become productive members of our society. They will contribute something. These people don't contribute anything. They have fun. I mean, we have another example where, through the eyes of a child, they're being taught something that's out of sync with what their parents are teaching them. Okay? Look at the representation of ethnic minorities. I mean, if you were to look at television through the eyes of a child and see who does what to whom, it's really clear that, one, victims are women, and two, people who perpetrate crimes are typically people who aren't white. And that's a very, very powerful racial message. And how, on the one hand, can we be talking about instilling the idea of racial harmony amongst our kids and in our schools, and yet on Saturday for 4 hours they see crime after crime being perpetrated by people who clearly aren't mainstream white America. They're clearly the other people. It's going backwards. It doesn't make sense. Look at sexuality in the soap operas. For a 10 or 12-year-old girl, the messages can be devastating. I mean, the number of girls that age who are on diets or think they should be on diets is staggering. And it's not just television. This is a whole thin culture. But soap after soap after soap, you have the ideal body type. And what does the ideal woman do? Well, she has to get a man to bed. That's how she keeps him. And it's no wonder that in a typical year, a child will see 14,000 references to sexual acts. And when you think about the fact that of these, only 100 to 150 have anything to do with abstinence or birth control, responsibility, or family planning.
How do we combat this as parents? I mean, I know we're still talking about the nature of the whole problem, but it makes you just ask. They're being bombarded. Obviously, one of your suggestions is to turn it off and to find alternatives.
Right.
But when we do, when they are exposed to it, how do we combat that? Do we watch with them? Do we, make comments? Do we teach them how to watch?
Exactly. I mean, there's a point at which you can't say to a 14-year-old, you can't watch that. It's very, very hard, or a 15-year-old. The best thing we can do with an older child is to teach them media literacy, teach them to become critical viewers. At the lower end, we can start to regulate. I mean, we have rules for all sorts of things. What our kids wear, what time they go to bed, what they can eat, what kind of magazines they can bring in the house, language they're allowed to use. Somehow television's escaped it, and what we're advocating here is not just turning it off. You might find a level that works in your house. Rope it in, bring it in. It's not something that's beyond your control. Put it within that sphere of rules. For a young child, you can do that. You can start teaching them to self-regulate early on. With an older child, it's a lot harder, and your best bet there is media literacy, training them to be critical viewers. Sit down and show them how they're being exploited. Kids don't like that. That really gets them going. Show them how commercials exploit them, how the soaps exploit them, how so many of these images that they see on television don't fit in with the real world. They have nothing to do with it. point out the fact that on television, a vast proportion of people are involved with redressing crimes and wrongs. And that's not how it is in the real world. That on television, if you put all of the plots together, there's a great percentage, or rather, there's a great chance that somebody is going to get killed, hurt, maimed, or something or other like that. In the real world, that's not the case. Sure, there are dangers in the real world, but it's grossly exaggerated. Get them to realize that what they're seeing is unreality, and they're being manipulated into watching it. And it's great. The more that you can do that, the more that they're going to resent it.
And that probably is 90–95% of television, but what about the instances where it is reality, which we're seeing a big dose of right now with the O.J. Simpson trial and possible invasion of Haiti? How do we deal with that? Should we consider these opportunities? Should we write to our media people and say you shouldn't have them on during prime time? Or, I mean, how do we deal with that?
Well, I think the first thing we have to do is remind ourselves that it's not news, it's entertainment. I mean, take the whole thing with Haiti or the Gulf War.
Frightening.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, this morning it was interesting on the news stations. They were struggling to make it news, and they would focus on the same ship. Well, there's a ship out there, and there's a helicopter, and there it is again. And you know what they're really hoping for is something dramatic, of course. And in fact, it was just that happened to be the events. Look at when something really happens, like the Gulf War. Sit down and talk to your child about the emphasis on all the technology, the smart bombs and all that, and point out that there's so much more to it, like all the people who are going to be affected. What's the context for this war? What does it mean for all these people? And it's not just, wow, press a button and watch it blow up. It's important to put it into context for your child.
Do you think there's an age under which it's too young to even discuss any of that, or do you think that they're probably going to be exposed no matter what and you should handle it?
Well, I can't give you a number, just like I can't say what's the correct amount of television viewing. Okay. Every family has to establish what works in their household, and certainly as a parent, you're the best expert in your child. You know when it's going to be appropriate to sit down and talk about the fact that there is a war going on, or there might be a war, or some disaster has happened. I mean, every parent knows when it's time to start cluing their child in.
And if they don't, from my point of view in the National Parenting Association, I know so many of us are hungry for information that helps us determine those things. You know, there's kind of an assumption that we know, and I think it's okay. We should give parents permission to say, maybe we don't know, and we can seek out some other advice about, you know, when it might be appropriate. And the whole issue of that you bring up that's really dear to my heart is the importance of parents really getting to know their children. There's kind of absence of that currently, and you could really do that around this issue. I mean, this is a really good opportunity to learn about your children and learn what makes them tick and have a lot of conversations around what they're viewing. I just find it fascinating.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. And I think that it is a great opportunity, even if it's a fleeting one, in the sense that if you're trying to cut back, okay, you're not going to be talking about television for the next 5 years. In the process of cutting down from, say, 5 hours a day to 2 hours a day, which you do show by show, you're going to want to talk about why it is that there's certain shows that you don't want to watch. Take the other shows too and tape them and watch with your child. I don't think that it's fair to interrupt a child's viewing and say, oh, well, this is this, and what do you think of this? Don't do that. They're just going to tune you out. Tape it. Go back to it later. And talk about both the commercials as well as what they're viewing. So it really is a good opportunity to figure out what are those emotional payoffs, what's your child getting out of that, because remember, you're going to have to give something back. If you're taking away, you have to give back, and that's going to mean in terms of time, in terms of understanding, and this is not something that you can do and just say, all right, you're going to watch 3 hours less today and you go do it and entertain yourself. It doesn't work like that. It's a commitment that starts with you. You change your viewing habits first. If the television's on all the time when you're cooking, cleaning, exercising, your child comes home from school and there it is, as background noise, right there you're communicating a pretty important message that this is life support technology, okay? Turn it off. Your child will notice it. If you happen to watch a program at 8 o'clock regularly, read a book instead. I mean, if you really want to watch it, tape it and watch it later, whatever, but be a role model, okay? Get your spouse or partner on board. That's critical too. Show that there's a commitment. Then you can really move to the next level of, well, let's understand together what television is all about. And it might be just that it's fun and you like it, and there's nothing wrong with that. Those are your A-level shows. It might be that your child thinks it's fun, you don't find anything offensive.
You're talking about a rating system,
right.
Your A-level. You decide what your
Exactly. Go back
are.
and watch with your child. Find out what he or she likes. Evaluate it from the criteria that you and I talked about a couple minutes ago in terms of what are the messages that are being communicated. Rate those shows A, B, or C. A being good fun or education. B being, I don't know why he watches it, but doesn't bother me. C being, we don't really want this in our house. And explain why. Make up an alternative TV guide and say, okay, we're going to watch 4 hours of television, and here are your pickings, okay? You pick. It's critical to give your child options, and then use those B-level shows as your bargaining chips, okay? But it's really important to let your child feel that, yeah, Mom really understands, or Dad knows that I like this show, and I get to watch it. I really miss that show, but I get this one, and I can pick from this one and this one. If your child feels empowered to make choices, and it's within your framework, then it's going to work. And gradually you close down till you get to the level that you want. Do it at a pace that works. A week probably isn't going to happen. 2 weeks is probably too short. It might take 6 months to a year. But pick a time frame that works for you. Again, you know what's going to work. You know what the proper pace is.
Do you find that some people are even in denial about how much television they watch? Because I can relate to that. I was raised on the television. I think those of us with young children at this point in time may have watched a lot of TV because it was so new, and you know, for me it was kind of a babysitter even when I was being brought up. So it's almost like a cyclical thing. Do you find people are in denial? And I know you talk about television withdrawal. Can you go into that a little bit?
Oh, absolutely. And one of the reasons that we urge people to monitor their own and their family's television watching, we do that at the beginning of the book and provide a form, is that people are stunned when they total it up. And when I throw out the national average of 7.2 hours and everyone goes, oh my goodness, how is that possible? It's very possible. I mean, you throw in a little bit of morning, a couple things in the afternoon, a few things around dinner, hit prime time, and bingo, 7.2 hours is very, very possible. People are shocked, and people don't like to admit it because there is a certain stigma. One of the things that we try to do in the book is say, don't worry about that. Do what's right for you and your family. If you like television and you think 7 hours is great, terrific. You don't need us. You don't need any help. That's just fine. You do what feels right. And there is no right number. The American Academy of Pediatrics says no more than 2 hours. The U.S. Department of Education says no more than 2 hours. Pick what works. I think that as kids get older and families get more involved with this, that the amount of time that seems reasonable it gets shorter and shorter and shorter, especially when you're concerned about reading proficiency and things like that. Because there's no doubt about it that as kids get older, especially into high school, every hour in front of the tube will diminish reading proficiency. So.
One of the statistics that stuck out to me, 7 hours a day seems like a lot, but for some reason 110 days a year seems incredible when you translate the 7 hours a day into a number of days per year. And I think if people realize that they're actually doing that, you may have a lot of people deciding that it would be a good idea to reduce the amount of television you're watching. I know I'm one of them, and the people that I've been talking to about your book are definitely interested in finding ways to monitor and to find alternatives to television. You mentioned time, and I think wherever you go, time is such an issue for people that the easy way out is to let the children watch television. And we have to make a commitment not to do that anymore, as far as my point of view. But beyond that, when you said if people just do desire to watch that much television, you also give suggestions on the kinds of things to watch for, asking the children how things make them feel, and talk about that a little bit. If you are deciding to watch television, talk a little bit more about the kinds of messages that they're getting, just to review some of those things.
Well, again, it's really important to find out what is the emotional payoff that your child's getting. Does your child feel good about himself or strong or empowered when he or she sees a certain sort of thing happening on television? Is your child finding a surrogate family or a surrogate group of friends? And it might not be the case that it's a bad family situation or the child doesn't have friends, but sometimes kids will kind of adopt or feel adopted by the stable characters on television. And boy, when that theme music hits, they're home free. Is that what your child's getting out of it? Is your child finding the television to be a really good source of, good in quotes, of information about the world, how to act, how to maneuver, what's cool, what's not cool? Your child might feel some very deep cultural connections there, that in order to be literate amongst his or her friends, that they've got to be watching this thing. So look for things like that.
Okay. What are some of the alternatives? I mean, you talk about, alternatives to television. Do you have some suggestions? I mean, I know in your chapters you have action steps where you talk about, cutting down the viewing. And do you have some alternatives to television?
Well, again, throw a family night, eat ice cream, go out for ice cream together, read books aloud together, bring out the old board games. And if you don't want to do that, make your own. I brought along a few things here that are great for 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old kids. And these are some things that my kids have actually invented. This is called an anything box here. And I'd say we've probably logged about 20 hours just playing with this thing, not in one shot, mind you, but just over time. And you just to fix things like milk jug caps. These are brads, which you can get at the stationery stores that they spin. Draw dials and things like that on there. Cut a hole in it, put toilet paper tubes on it, strap toilet paper tubes on the side. And then the idea is that we'll make things, okay? Now here's something from Pluto, which you might like to put into the hopper here. Okay, careful, that stuff's pretty potent. And I'll put something in here too. This is actually from Mars. This is one of my son's favorite little puns. This is dehydrated water.
Okay.
All right? And we'll turn some knobs, turn some knobs, you open the door down there. And go ahead.
Down here?
Yeah, I think you've got the door. Can you open that up there?
I think so.
All right. Is there anything in there?
I think so.
Well, look what all that stuff made. A truck. That's how trucks are made, you know. I mean, Detroit has real big ones like this. Simple things like this. My 4-year-old invented this,
really
okay? We got her thinking in those terms. It's real simple. And this might be 20 minutes, half an hour right there. That's a television segment. Here's a board game that we didn't buy at a store. Our kids made this. Now, we made it look pretty by rounding out the edges here. We just passed out construction paper, and this is from some stuff that came in the mail, some little hearts that came with some junk mail and stuff like that. You let your kids invent their own game. You know, you're used to playing rules by board games. Well, make up some tokens. These are bottle caps. Okay, get a pair of dice, or a dice, and go ahead. So if you were to roll, say, why don't you roll that dice? I'll move you.
Here.
Okay, well, you just rolled a 3, and so you'd be up here, and let's see, I'll roll again so I can get to one of the things, a 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, what's that star? That star could be anything. It might mean that you advance 5 spaces. It might mean that you go back to the beginning, whatever. Let your kids invent their own rules, and what a treat. Kids love to create. It is amazing. Even those who have been hooked on television, there is a wealth of creativity that is waiting to get out. Things like this, and you have to make it age appropriate. Obviously, a 14-year-old is probably not going to enjoy this a whole lot, but a child, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, whatever, who will see the opportunity to create a game, they'll get into it. And you can pass half an hour, even an hour. And what does it cost? Nothing. This is all from junk around the house. Simple things like that. Here's another game that my kids invented. You spread these out on the floor. These are pieces of paper with different numbers on them. These are scores, and the smaller the paper, the higher the score. The larger it is, the lower the score, even negative scores. It's a great way to teach negative numbers here. You spread these out on the floor, then play lid Frisbee. Remember, the goal here is spend nothing. Some old coffee top cups and a jar lid, and you're tossing them out and seeing, who could land theirs on the various scores, and then let your child score. It's a great way to do math, play games, and kids love sports. It's a lot of fun.
I want to do that.
Do some indoor sports. Great. I mean, have an Olympics. Give everybody a cup. And, okay, we're going to do another one here. You have to be 4 years old to do this.
Oh, it bounces.
A little bouncy, but have an Olympics here. Go ahead. Woo.
Ooh, you've got an edge.
It takes a lot of skill there. Simple stuff there.
Fun.
Another thing that we like to do is spoof television by doing our own television. Now, we call these things, here, I'll do this one. This has got 2 antennae up here. We call these mini tube heads. Looks like a shopping bag, but in point of fact, it's a great way to really get into television here. Dropping some stuff. So, you can now do an editorial like, this is the evening news here. A 14-foot dinosaur has been reported in the closet in my sister's room, or whatever. You could interview mom or dad, or you could spoof a cooking show. Hi there, we're going to have a cooking lesson today. This is a Swedish meatball. We put in the anything machine and look what happens to it. Bake it 400. The kids get off on it. It's great. It doesn't cost anything, and it's an opportunity to role play, to do some theatrics, simple stuff. This is the kind of things that we do, and in our household, we've had pretty good luck with television. We don't have a television policy. Our kids don't watch television either, and the reason is that it's never occurred to them that you would do that for entertainment, because all this stuff is around. We try to be there as much as we can and do this stuff, but it's interesting, they'll play with this stuff by themselves, and kids can be taught. If that's the stuff that's out there, that's what we do as a family, that's what you can do by yourselves, and they'll start to self-regulate.
That's great. These are really good ideas.
And simple.
And very simple, and not very costly.
Well, you know, back before the age of television, this is what people did.
Right.
They made do with what they had.
It's too simple. TV is just almost too simple to. You flip it on and there it is, and it's entertaining, and you don't think. Yeah.
So this is simple too, but it does make you think, and that's
makes
the
you
difference.
think.
Exactly.
That's great. I enjoyed the progression in your book. The very beginning talks about all this that we've been talking about, the internal changes that you make, your own unhooking yourself from the television and being a role model, and then doing the monitoring and the evaluation of how you're viewing television. The other areas of the book progressively talk about taking this to your school and taking it to your community. Can you talk about some of those action steps?
Yes, I think that once you've started dealing with this issue in your house, you're going to say, well, I got my four walls and I've got my boundaries set up here. My child's probably doing some backsliding at friends or grandparents' house when the grandparents don't want to be the bad guy, or maybe our babysitter doesn't comply. That's okay. When you unlearn learned behavior, it's not linear. It's all right. It's not going to derail your efforts. Just, talk to your child about it and be honest, so that, you could talk about what they saw. You don't want them feeling like, oh my goodness, I don't want to tell mom or dad that I saw this. But anyhow, you've gotten it under control. Your kid is going to be watching outside the house. There's going to be an influence from school. Let's think about the schools. What can schools do? In the past, teachers have primarily taken the position, most teachers that is, television is pop culture, it's a terrible influence, we don't want to deal with it. Parents, that's your problem. Can't do that. This is a media society. What they are bombarded with is going to come into the classroom, and we certainly saw that with the advent of the Ninja Turtles, which was one of the most disruptive events in teaching history. I mean, teachers across the land who were surveyed just went bananas over those things. It was causing terrible problems. But beyond that, so much of what they're trying to teach kids is the opposite message is being shown on their favorite shows. It's time to deal with the issue. And you do that in a couple ways. One is you call for a reduced viewing week, just to show people that it's possible. These school TV turn-off weeks generally don't accomplish a whole lot because people go back to their old ways. Some people feel that it's very intrusive, but I still think nevertheless it's important through the school to say, let's watch no television or less television for a week, just to show you that it's not immutable. Second, let's introduce media literacy into the classroom here and have discussions about shows, just like we talked about before. On a classroom basis, that could be fantastic. A kindergarten teacher, a first grade teacher, okay? Talk about heroes, superheroes. Use that as an opportunity to redefine who is a hero. Maybe we have some heroes in our community, maybe in our school, maybe in our classroom. It's an opportunity to get people thinking.
Well, I am very thankful for you writing this book. You're becoming one of my heroes. I think this topic of taking it to the schools and the community could be a whole nother program. We have to wrap up here. Unfortunately, the time went really fast. Thank you so much, and I know that I'm going to go out and talk about this book to people.
Thank you.
In his book, Kick the TV Habit, Steve Bennett has proposed a number of practical, doable, and fun activities for families looking for alternatives to TV. Thank you, Steve Bennett. Thank you, Fran Hesch. And thanks to all of you for joining us on All About Kids. Please tune in again.
This has been a presentation of Hennepin County Library in conjunction with the Twin Cities Metropolitan Library Service Agency.